So I've been learning more and more about this odd machine over the last couple weeks. This is a 1997 Harley 883 Sportster, and I got it running yesterday, so it's probably the first time it's run in like 15 years. It actually fired up right away, but there's a big point of confusion that I have about this thing, and it turns out it has a magical oil system where it's able to transport oil to some other dimension and you can't find it. So where that came about, and I'm really glad that I posted the first video because my favorite Canadian YouTuber, True Moto Resto, happened to let me know that these things suffer from something called oil sumping or wet sumping. And that is because it's a dry sump system. It's got an oil tank over there, and the oil tank has a capacity of about 3 liters of oil. And then because it's a dry sump system, the feed pump will pump it up into the engine, back down. There'll be a scavenging pump on the same pump that sends it back to the oil filter, or the oil tank. But what can happen over extended periods of time of it just sitting is that there is a check ball inside of here. So this is where the oil filter would be, and then actually inside of it, here's the adapter to put the oil filter on. But there's this little check ball that sits inside of there, and it will sit here, so when it's resting you won't have oil seeping from the tank all the way into the bottom crankcase. The problem is, if there's any little bit of debris on this or any little imperfection on it, or if the spring got weak or something like that, it's slowly going to let oil drip into the crankcase. So I'm looking, I can see a little bit of a wear ring on this. When I was trying to pull it out, I thought it was a stainless, or not stainless, but a steel ball. So magnet obviously wasn't working, but I was able to get it out with 2 35-degree angle picks. But that should sit on there, so I clean this up. I may end up buying another one of these, but I don't know how much of a leak this one actually has, because we're talking 15 years of potential leaking. So if it was leaking, let's just say 1 ounce per month, over the course of a winter, you're going to lose 6, maybe let's call it 10 ounces. It's not a big deal. When you start the bike, it'll pump it all back up into the oil tank, which is over here. So I was really confused about starting this thing because I had originally drained the oil from here, and when I drained it, so you just pull this off, and I've got it pretty much drained now, but there's like none in it. So when I drained it for the first time, the way you drain it is that there is a line here that's just connected to a stud that comes off of here. So you just undo the clamp and then pull the tube off, and it will drain the oil. But I drained 400 milliliters when I was expecting 3 liters of oil. So then the big question becomes, where is that oil? So what I wanted to do was pull the oil plug off the bottom of the crankcase so I could drop the expected 2,600 other milliliters of oil that's sitting inside of this thing and catch it in here and just start fresh. Here's the problem. This bike does not have an oil plug. I kept looking all over, and I just figured I had to be missing it. After doing some research, no, it does not have one. So the conundrum is, do I start it with ostensibly 2,600 milliliters of oil sitting inside of the thing? So I tried at first is I took the plugs out and just left them grounded to here so I don't burn out the coils, and I just kept turning it over to see if I would get anything pumping back in, and I got very little that was coming back up into the oil tank. So then I was like, screw it. I mean, reading about it, it sounds like what you want to do is fire it up, and if you fire it up with that much oil inside of it, you'll get blow by, and where it's going to blow by, so there's normally an air filter housing that's going to sit over this carburetor, and it's going to come out of the crankcase breathers and shoot oil all over the place if it's extremely overfilled, which is what I was expecting it to do. I didn't think about it at the time, but the first time I started it was right here, and if it did what I thought it was going to do, it was just going to soak me. But it didn't. It fired right up. I actually got it idling pretty easily, pretty quickly, and I ran it through a 10-minute cycle just to get it up to hot, and I was hoping to see this oil tank fill completely. So I could see it filling, but then it hit a stable level right about there, and then I was like, I'm kind of done running this, because I don't know if I'm just running it with no oil inside of it. So then I drained the tank again, and that time I caught 700 milliliters of oil in the oil catch pan. So I have literally no idea how much oil is in this thing. It may have absolutely none inside of it, or it's got 2,300 milliliters sitting inside of it. I have no idea, and there's no way for me to figure it out. It's lunacy that there is no drain plug on it. And I keep making the mistake of reading all of these different Harley forums about, you know, why it's not a big deal and whatnot. It's like, oh yeah, just bring it in. It'll, you know, we do this all the time. We just fire it up. Well, here's my question. There's two scenarios where I think it's a really bad idea to not have an oil drain plug on the bottom. One, what happens if the floats, all right, you've got a petcock on here, you've got, let's say that the tank is getting, what am I saying? The vacuum operated petcock is failing and it's dripping into the carburetor. Right now this carburetor has an overflow on it. It's actually right here. Let's say this overflow gets pinched somewhere or gets debris in it, and all of a sudden the overflow doesn't work, so it doesn't go out there. That fuel, can it make, yeah, it can migrate that way, and it can migrate, especially if it's over on the side stand, then it's all gonna fall that way. Falls into the cylinders, it all goes into the crankcase. What if you got 4 liters of fuel in there? How do you get it out? Well, you start it, you're gonna make a giant mess. Or you potentially hydrolock something and then start breaking inside components. All right, so I'm not thrilled about that. The second issue I see with that, let's say I give you this bike, you have no history on this thing, and you see that there's no oil in here. Be like, it must all be inside of the crankcase. All right, so you start it up and you run it for the 10 minutes like I just did. And you get nothing coming back out here, or you get very little coming back out here. Are you now running a bike that's supposed to have a 3 to 3.5 liter capacity? Are you now running it on 200 milliliters of oil and potentially really doing some major damage inside of it? I think you could potentially be in that situation. So my plan, because I got 4 liters of really good oil, the oil that's inside of this thing is literally 20 years old and it's black as night. I don't want to use all the good oil yet, so I was thinking I'm going to get a gallon of Rotella T4, run it through. So I'm going to put like 1 liter in it, and then I'm going to try running it again and see, do I get 1 liter back or do I get more after that? So then I will just dump that and that will go to waste. If that all goes well, I will do another run where I'll try putting 2 liters of oil inside of this thing, see, do I get 2 liters of oil to come back out of it? If I do, then I'm going to feel more comfortable actually going up to the full recommended oil level on here, which whatever it is on the dipstick, say it's, I think this thing has like a safe and minimum. So I don't know, I would probably run it pretty low, maybe like right there. See how that goes. I'll put the good oil in. I'll have a little bit of the Rotella T4 that gets mixed, and the reason I don't think the Rotella T4 is the greatest idea is because it's a 15W40, whereas this bike calls for 20W50. When it's cold like this, 15W40 is not a big deal, but I figured the majority at that point will be 20W50. But the rest of it, I've done a pretty good job. I'm actually way ahead of where I thought I would be at this point. So the carburetor I had all apart, ultrasonic clean, and I only had a couple different issues with it. The pilot it looked like perfect, like it hadn't actually even been, like, it had no fuel left in it. Everything inside of it was great, real easy to work on. Diaphragm looked good and everything like that. The 2 issues that I had was that the pilot was really, really stuck in there, and I chipped the frickin' thing first. I almost shot myself right in the eye with it. So I fashioned a screwdriver. I took it over to the grinder, got a really, really good fit, soaked in penetrating oil for a day first, and then I was able to bust that thing out. And the pilot had a bunch of varnish, and it had like frozen completely into a black mess. So there was no way it was actually going to be able to fire without getting that thing out, and I did end up having to replace that with another 42 Pilot from a kit. The other thing is it has an accelerator pump here, and I rebuilt the accelerator pump, but so what should happen is when you do the original throttle, it should actually shoot a little bit of fuel out of here directly into it, just to, I don't know if it's more to help with starting or if it's to bridge that gap from a really quick, like low throttle to throttle chop so that it doesn't stutter as much. I've seen some arguments that people actually don't like running these, and some people actually eliminate it. I'll probably, if I find running problems, especially on the stutter throttle, I'll go through and actually see if I can figure out why that rebuild on there didn't work. I did get the throttle snapback working really nicely. That actually took quite a while to do that. Lubed the shit out of the cables and whatnot, and just a bunch of fidgeting around up here. The other issue that I had with the carburetor is that back here, the Welch plug hadn't been drilled out yet, which told me that it hadn't been messed with. But because of what I saw with that Pilot being all screwed up, I figured the air fuel mixture screw is probably not looking great, and I was right. So when I backed the thing, or not, before I backed the thing out, actually, after the plug had come out, I checked how many turns the air fuel mixture screw was out, and that thing was out 5 turns, which means it had been backing itself out substantially, because it should have been like between 2 and 3 stock. So I just reset it to 2.5, but I put one of those like easy adjust ones on it, so I'll be able to pretty easily manually adjust this one to you know, figure out where I actually want to get it. But besides that, I think the carburetor is going to be all right. Reuse the main jet, reuse the needle. Didn't really put in anything outside of a couple rubber bits like the flow bulk gasket and the air fuel mixture screw O-ring. That was pretty much it. That's a lot of money to spend on a rebuild kit where I used like 3 components of it. And then one of the other things that I thought was actually going to be an issue with running it is when I pulled the plugs, the old plugs looked fouled as shit, and then the gaps on the 2 of them were like completely different. Like one of them looked like it had actually been damaged. Like I think this rear one especially was no good. And then the other thing on here, I could see this coil terminal or cable. This was really rusty. I've been going at it with a bunch of treatments at the Oxit, but ultimately I think this one needs to get replaced, but it did fire. So, and I put in new NGK plugs on it. So anyway, new battery, new tires. This thing is about 10 times harder to get both of the wheels off compared to say an SV650 where I can do it in like 10 minutes. Ultrasonically cleaned the master cylinder. I just reused the parts that were in it, and it's worked really well. I've got it bled up. New stainless line down to the front. Rebuilt front caliper. Rebuilt recaliper. I didn't bother replacing the line on the rear, but brakes pumped up real good, nice and easy. That's basically now. I'm gonna get the oil thing figured out, and if I can get it to run right without the accelerator pump working, you know, idling and whatnot, hopefully I'm able to do a little test ride. You can already see there's just a crap ton of salt on the roads and in my garage, but whatever, I want to figure out if it works. So yeah, it's a magic oil teleporting machine. It either has 2,300 milliliters of oil in it, or it has 0, and I have no way of checking. But I guess that's why we take on these fun projects, to learn about these things and understand how they came about. So hopefully I'll have more on this in the future. You watched this far. Thanks for watching.